Good evening and welcome to Colorado Inside Out, PBS 12's weekly roundtable that brings together journalists, pundits, and other members of the community to talk about current events in Denver, Colorado, and sometimes even the rest of the world. I'm Patty Calhoun, editor of Westward, and I'll be attempting to moderate tonight's panel, which includes Marianne Goodland, chief State House reporter for Colorado politics and the Gazettes. Welcome. Alayna Alvarez, reporter with Axios Denver. Welcome. And Sage Naumann, Republican strategist and commentator. Thanks for joining us. Not with us tonight is David Kopel, and our thoughts are with him and his family. For topic one, as the worsening drought continues to impact communities across the West, the Department of the Interior and the Bureau of Reclamation have announced action to improve and protect the long-term sustainability of the Colorado River system. Marianne, you have been reporting this story. What do we need to know?
Well, back on June 14th, the commissioner of the Bureau of Reclamation told Congress that the 7 states of the Colorado River Basin had 60 days to come up with a plan on how to save 2 to 4 million acre-feet of water in order, in part, to preserve hydropower at both the Hoover Dam and Glen Canyon Dam. 4 million acre-feet of water is about a third of the water that the Colorado River generates every year, so it was a huge, huge ask. And so for the last 60 days, everyone's been running around trying to figure out where do you come up with 4 million acre-feet of water, particularly since agriculture uses up somewhere between 80 and 90% of that water. So on Tuesday, they had their big announcement, and it was a big nothing. The savings that the commissioner announced was 721,000 acre-feet of water, which sounds like a lot, except that most of that water has already been cut back in actions that were determined back in 2007. The 2 to 4 million acre-feet is over and above that, so there really was no grand announcement, and in the words of a couple of folks I've talked to, the announcement was underwhelming. The states called the bluff of the Bureau of Reclamation, and they came up with basically nothing and said, well, we'll work on this sometime down the road. That is a dangerous position to take because of the low water levels at Lake Mead, which is reaching what's called dead pool. When it hits dead pool, it means that it can no longer pump water. And that is a huge hit to Hoover Dam's hydropower generating capacity. At Lake Powell, it is also at about a quarter full. Lake Powell is the water bank for the upper Colorado Basin, which includes Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, and New Mexico. And it has already cut its hydropower production by 40%. What this means for folks going forward are two things. Number one, agriculture is going to have to be the solution to these declining water levels. And there are some proposals floating out there. And in fact, Arizona and Nevada did come up with a proposal to save 2 million acre-feet of water, and California rejected it. The upper basin states also came up with their own 5-point plan that did not have even one drop of savings contained in it, so that's also been considered not exactly helpful. The upper basin states believe that they have nothing to contribute or have very limited opportunities to put more water into this. With regard to the hydropower situation, if they wind up losing hydropower either at Hoover or Glen Canyon, it means your electricity bills are going to go way up because they're going to have to rely on some other source to generate that electricity, and that's coal or natural gas. Where this goes, we don't know. Reclamation said that they would give the states more time, but they didn't set a deadline, and frankly, the clock is ticking. And frankly, we're all in big trouble if they don't come up with some idea on how to fix this problem.
Alayna, I know you've been following the environment too. Where do you see this going?
I mean, it's really interesting to know whether the Bureau has the authority in the first place to do this. I think that's going to be a really key issue to unscramble here, and I don't have the answer. Clearly, though, as Marianne has made clear in her points as well, the big picture is that climate change is real, and we are in an unprecedented drought. That means our water resources will continue to dry if we don't make major changes. It's somewhat hopeful to see local leaders at the state and city level here in Colorado taking steps. You can argue if they're far enough and if they're a little bit too late. But, we had Governor Jared Polis this year sign 2 bills that are aimed at conserving water. We have the city of Denver that launched its own climate action office in the last 2 years. We have cities like Aurora that's taking steps right now to, ban certain kinds of turf that just suck up water and don't do anything to give back to our natural ecosystem. But the bottom line is, as Marianne said, the solution really does lie in the agricultural sector. That sector is by far the biggest user of the river, and until major changes are made there, we're in a problematic situation that continues to get worse.
Sage, I know you're doing your bit with your weeds in your yard, just like I'm doing with my dirt. What more can the government do?
Well, that's a really good question. Looking at water from a 30,000-foot view, first of all, it's not a sexy issue. Honestly, if you were to poll Coloradans on the issues that they care most about, it probably ranks just below getting the Avs back on TV. It's something that honestly is very complex. Water policy is something that is usually confined to a select few individuals who really understand the law and really understand the history behind it. Thankfully, we have journalists that constantly follow the issue. But the fact is that, we've talked about water storage in this state for a long, long time, and it's been something that I'm guessing has been a discussion in those other states as well. But the political willpower to actually take steps to make investments in water storage isn't there. Everyone wants the money to be spent on something else. Every time there's a discussion that I know of lawmakers in the state capitol, I never see water storage be one of those top things that they want to spend extra general fund money on, excess revenues that are coming in. It's just not something that's being prioritized. So I think that generally speaking, this requires a lot of political willpower, leaders to step up and say, look, we understand this isn't the sexy issue, this isn't the thing you see on TV all the time, but it's an issue that's going to start impacting your life if we don't take action now. And it's also going to require, I think, voters to start paying attention to it. Obviously, the impact on it from climate change is one thing, but the impacts that they're going to feel day to day is going to be dramatic. And to what Marianne brought up something very interesting too, which is that as you decrease hydropower, where are you pulling power from? And she mentioned coal. Well, Colorado is trying to transition away from coal. So how in the world does that work? We're gonna find ourselves in a situation where a source of green energy, hydro, is being taken off the table while we're trying to transition away from fossil fuels. At some point, something's going to break because there's just not enough power there to pull from. And so, like she said, costs go up. Those things will dramatically impact people, and hopefully they start paying attention before we get to a point where it's impacting their energy rates and they're having to cut back on water.
Or we could just jettison Arizona and Nevada and California and become the kingdom of Colorado. But we'll discuss that at another time. Meanwhile, on July 17th, 3 Denver police officers trying to subdue a man with a gun shot into the crowd of leaving bars during Denver's let-out at 20th and Larimer, injuring 6 bystanders as well as the suspect. Videos of this incident were released this week, just minutes after Denver DA Beth McCann announced that she was sending the entire incident to a grand jury for investigation. Alayna, you've been following this story. What do we think about the grand jury move?
It's really significant, and this is for a number of reasons. So first and foremost, it's the first time that DA Beth McCann has called on a grand jury since taking office in 2017, called on a grand jury to review whether an officer shooting at a suspect was justified. So that's number one. Number two, we have national police experts that are telling us that grand jury investigations in the state and beyond are very uncommon and used in highly political cases. The big picture in Colorado and beyond, it's historically extremely rare for officers to be charged for something like this, whether the incident is fatal or not. But in the wake of George Floyd's murder in 2020, the mood has really shifted, and more scrutiny is being placed on officers and their use of force. Something to note here is that Denver's police watchdog agency remains without a permanent leader, and they have just restarted. They just reposted the position this month after basically, letting go of the 3 previous finalists. So we don't have a top watchdog looking over the police agency right now, which is not ideal considering what's going on right now. I will also add that this case, since the body cam footage surveillance videos were released this week, has drawn national attention from civil rights activists that have millions of social media followers, and I've seen them, posting messages of just complete outrage and calling for action and even some resignation. So it's certainly getting attention, and the outcome of that grand jury investigation will be watched really, really closely.
Yeah, there's a lot of interest in this right now. Sage, have you been paying attention to the issue?
I have, yeah. I got a chance to actually watch the footage for myself just yesterday. You know, first of all, like was mentioned, the grand jury investigation is somewhat rare. It's hard to say that that's going to be the perfect solution for these kind of high-profile cases moving forward, because they require a lot to go into them, and it's not a quick fix. You know, there's been a lot of talk about, you know, oversight boards that are, you know, independent, and I think that that's going to be a discussion that continues, because I think that, I don't know necessarily if grand jury investigations are the best way to go with any kind of a, you know, officer-involved shooting or fatality or anything like that. But in this case specifically, look, I'm not an attorney, but from what I saw in the footage is, clearly, I think that there were procedures that were broken. I mean, the grand jury is going to have to look at two specific things. Number one is, were they justified in shooting the suspect? And number two, were procedures followed or not followed, especially by the second officer, who basically fired, understanding that there were bystanders some 5-10 feet away, it looked like from the footage that I saw. I think the second one is going to be a lot easier to prove, because from my understanding of police procedure, you do not fire upon someone knowing that there are innocent civilians just a few feet away, and the chances of you missing your target are pretty high. The argument over the first person is going to be more difficult. I mean, this is a suspect who had his hands up in the air, quickly reached into his hoodie and pulled out a gun, and then was throwing it away, which is an interesting choice to make when you have officers with firearms drawn on you. I think the attorney for the suspect released a slowed down video that basically showed that the gun was something like a foot away from his hand. He'd already tossed it by the time the officer was firing. But if you watch it in full speed, it makes it a lot harder to discern whether or not that officer had made the decision before the gun was out of his hands. Because again, these are split-second decisions. And I think that that's going to be a much more difficult thing for a grand jury to look at. But again, this is something that goes to them. I don't live in Denver. I'm not on the grand jury. So I wish whoever's picked to look at that the best of luck, and hopefully they get all the facts, they can make the right decision.
And Tyrone Glover, that attorney, was here on the panel last week, right before those videos were released. So he knew what was coming. Marianne, where do you see this going, both in enforcement in that area, where I'm sure you're partying at 2 o'clock every Saturday night, and with the grand jury?
I think the grand jury choice by Beth McCann is an interesting one. They've only convened 3 grand juries in 30 years, and none under McCann's watch, as Alayna pointed out, to look at officer-involved shootings. And you kind of wonder what went into her decision-making process to go this route. She has reviewed over 35 officer-involved shootings since she's been in office, and every single one of them came back as justified. I believe they were all come back as justified. So it'll be interesting to see how the grand jury looks at it from that perspective. Our reporting, Carol McKinley at the Denver Gazette did some really good reporting on it this week, and she had a former police officer and a forensics expert look at that video. And to Sage's point about the split-second decision-making, this gentleman's review of this was that it's not possible to know whether they thought that he was going to aim at somebody or he was actually tossing the gun. And he said, throwing the firearm occurs within a second and could easily be perceived as pointing a handgun toward the crowd. And it'll be interesting to see how the grand jury views that action.
Well, and in the meantime, maybe they will allow the food trucks that have been banned to return there. I mean, after all, these people were not hit by flying tacos. They were hit by bullets shot by Denver police officers. And now on to topic 3. Colorado has just released the results of the state standardized testing for students 3rd through 8th grade. And while they've gotten a little better than last year, the scores are still far lower than pre-pandemic levels. Sage, what do you see this holding for Colorado education and students?
Look, anytime the majority of students are failing, your system is failing. It is great that we've kind of bounced back a little bit from COVID-19, but we weren't doing well before COVID-19. And the fact is that the current education system, the status quo, is not functional. It is not working. And this has obviously become an issue that's become very polarized. Different states are approaching it differently. We saw a huge pro-school choice bill just passed in Arizona that basically allows parents to take the money and send their kid wherever they want to. the fact is, though, is that we need to have a discussion about what other alternatives there are, whether that's charter schools, whether it's what people will call a voucher program. Because right now we have a vast majority of kids not reading, doing math at grade level in the state of Colorado, and that's terrible. And that is even worse when you look at Black and brown students. And especially with the COVID-19 pandemic, I mean, one thing that I've always talked about is the fact that during COVID-19, the kids who were able to kind of, tough through it are the ones whose parents had money, could get them a tutor, put them in a school pod, as they call it. The ones who couldn't were the ones who have parents who are working 2-3 jobs, and the numbers just pan out. Those end up being minority students in the state of Colorado, and that's terrible. Those disparities have to be addressed. So, I mean, quite frankly, the only way that you can look at these test scores is, wow, schools in Colorado are not doing well, and we have to find another solution. It's as simple as that. Look, there's been a huge discussion over school funding in the state, too. This is a fight that we have every single year at the state capitol. And one thing that's important to note is that, people always point to the national aggregators on school funding and say that Colorado's per pupil spending is much lower than other states, 48th, 49th, 50th, whatever we are this year. But the fact is that a lot of other states, their funding formulas are different than ours. So, for example, in California, property taxes are gathered in the district, sent to Sacramento, and sent back down to the districts to be more equitable, because obviously otherwise wealthy districts get way more money than those that are poor. In Colorado, it's a little bit different. We have certain local taxes that make up something like a third of our school funding, our per pupil funding, that never ever reach Denver. And so what happens is these aggregators look at the numbers, they look at our School Finance Act, and they add the federal money that they know about, and they say that's their per pupil spending. That's actually not true. And if you add in that local funding, we're somewhere around the middle of the pack. And we've been shoveling money into our school system for years now, and it hasn't been working. We've seen a dramatic increase in administrators being hired, and not the same increase in teachers nor their pay. So this is also an issue at the local level. This isn't something that just the state can fix. But the fact is that we need to start prioritizing individuals over institutions, and we need to start letting money follow the kids, because the status quo isn't working, and anyone that says that it is or defends it, I'm sorry, we're leaving behind generations of Colorado students.
Marianne, clearly education is a huge issue at the State House. Where do you see this going?
Well, one of the frustrating things has been that the General Assembly put together an interim committee to reconfigure the School Finance Act. This interim committee has been meeting for, I believe, 4 summers in a row, and are no closer to coming up with a better way of fixing how schools are financed than they were 3 years ago. They've been nibbling around the edges of that issue with nothing concrete. I think one of the sadder things about these results that came out were not only that our students aren't reading at grade or doing math at grade level, but the lack of participation in these, because you're allowed to opt out of these testing scores. And there was a decided lack of participation both by Black and brown students. And so we don't really have a clear picture on how these students are performing. And this matters for those districts, and this matters probably more than anywhere else at Denver Public Schools, where 14% of their students are Black, and they have a substantial Hispanic population as well, which includes some of those English language learners, as well as students from other countries. So I think for Denver Public Schools, this is a kind of a scary warning sign that they need to get their act together.
And Alayna, do you see how they can get their act together?
If I did, I'm in the wrong job. But I think these two, nailed it perfectly. I couldn't say it any better. And I think the bottom line here is that our Black, Hispanic, and low-income students are being left behind. These disparities are growing. And in the year 2022, that just feels absolutely absurd. And a new study, actually, we reported about this week also showed that Colorado is paying, the wage gaps for teachers is among the highest in the country as far as discrepancies go. And so, at a time when teachers, we're missing them in the classroom, kids are performing lower. I mean, we have to prioritize education. We have to, prioritize our teachers. They deserve better pay. And I think they are a huge part of this puzzle that helps our improve scores.
And we'll stay on the education beat. Next Monday, Denver Public Schools return. And in the meantime, we have the Board of Education, or certain members of the Board of Education, bickering and giving us an excellent lesson in how not to get along. Marianne, what do you think the behavior of the Denver School Board is going to mean as we move into the next session?
I didn't think that there was any school board more dysfunctional in the Front Range or even in the entire state than the Douglas County School Board. And then DPS comes along and goes, hold my beer. This is a scary time for students in Denver Public Schools when their school board gets into as many fights and disputes over personality conflicts and not about policy. And this is a school board that has a lot of really hard decisions coming up, dropping enrollments, the potential for closing some of the schools, low teacher pay, dissatisfaction, all of these different things. And yet you have a school board that is in open warfare. This is ridiculous. Grow up, people, please. You're supposed to be the adults in the room. I think this bodes poorly also for the superintendent, who is not going to get the kind of direction that he needs from a school board. They can't seem to agree or get along on anything. So good luck, Denver Public Schools, and good luck to the students.
Alayna, where do you see this going?
I'll just highlight some recent reporting from our partners at Chalkbeat, Colorado, who detailed this recent school board retreat meeting where members couldn't even agree on whether to call each other by their first names, not to mention, plans on how to gather input or, how to move forward. I thought that was so telling, and an outside facilitator talked about how palpable the tension was. They described, distrust, fear, hesitation in the room. And I just think, nationwide, Denver Public Schools Board is a great example of what's happening nationwide, which is that these school boards are getting, hyper politicized, from COVID mask policies to, what's in library books to, who's using what bathroom. And the whole, what's just so devastating is that, as we just talked about, our kids are suffering as all of these board members can't, look past their own personal agendas to see the big picture. And it's a huge disservice to our kids.
Sage, does it make you glad you don't live in Denver?
Yeah, obviously. Here's the thing. William F. Buckley, I think, had this joke he'd tell that, you could pop open a phone book and pick the first 400 people and they'd be better in Congress than who we have. And it's a joke and everyone, ha, ha, ha. But I'm seriously getting to the point where I'm about to pull open a phone book and be like, okay, these people are now on the Denver School Board. Because, quite frankly, it's ironic because you mentioned Douglas County Schools. That's a split school board. That's nearly half and half. Conservatives have like a one-seat majority on there. The rest are Democrats. This is a school board where a Republican can't possibly win. I have a better chance at winning Dancing with the Stars than a Republican getting elected to the Denver School Board. But the thing is that we go back to test scores and the disparity. I think it's something like under 10% of black students in DPS are reading and writing and doing math at grade level. It's absolutely ridiculous. And meanwhile, there was a proposal recently for a new charter school called 5280 Freedom School that went before DPS, and they rejected it. And that school was specifically geared towards black students that are being left behind. And they rejected it. And this week it actually went to the state school board, and they overturned that rejection and said, you need to consider this school again. I can't imagine any scenario where they're sitting there saying, I'm sorry, this school, it's not going to work out for us. If 10% of black kids in your district aren't reading, writing, or doing math at grade level, how much worse can it get? This school board, talking about water, there must be something in the water that's letting them all grow oversized egos on that board, because the focus on themselves is absolutely outrageous. And the fact that more Denver residents aren't absolutely losing their mind, especially parents, over this, they're acting like children. And I hope there are backroom discussions with Denver Democratic leaders who have been around a long time, talking to these folks on the school board saying, you got to clean this up. You're making a fool of us, but you're also leaving tons of kids behind, and it's completely unacceptable.
Yes, the board could take a lesson from us all getting along. But now we come to our favorite part. Marianne, what is your disgrace of the week?
I have a tag team group. It's Jenna Ellis and Tina Peters, and it turns out that they're both involved in the same thing. Both were invited to a Mike Lindell conference. Tina asked for permission from the courts in Mesa County, which promptly said no, and it's outrageous that you would even ask, because it's to premiere a movie that she's featured in that talks about what she did in Mesa County. Jenna Ellis is also going to be appearing at this conference, and she is under subpoena in Georgia. So it's interesting to see if either of them show up there and whether or not they're going to be leaving in a very different manner.
Alayna, your disgrace.
As if finding your way around Denver International Airport wasn't complicated enough, airport officials announced this week they're moving airline check-ins, so I'm going to be arriving to the airport at least 3 hours in advance now to find my way around with all the construction.
But there's a new restaurant there. The Mercantile's open, so go. And now something nice, short and sweet, please.
I want to salute a gentleman by the name of Eli Tomac, who is a 3-time national champion in the 450 motocross, who announced that he is stepping away from that. And we're those of us who love watching him at Thunder Valley in Lakewood every spring are going to miss him a lot.
Alayna.
The Biden administration is ramping up its delivery of monkeypox vaccines, which will be really critical in Colorado because thousands of people are still waiting on the wait list to get that vaccine.
And Sage, your something nice?
My something nice is the fact that Liz Cheney, on the night of her defeat, admitted defeat. Obviously, that's something that's been difficult for many Republicans to do recently, and it's been a stain on the party that I have been in my entire adult life. That night, she called her opponent, gave a speech, said, "I lost fair and square," and that's that. And I think that more Republicans should do the same when they lose.
And I want to say something nice about History Colorado, which had a great program last night with all the 3 former mayors and the current mayor of Denver. It was a great discussion. So thank you all. Thank you to the people who were there and then who came up and said they enjoy this show. That's all the time we had tonight for Colorado Inside Out. Watch this and other episodes at pbs12.org or on the PBS 12 YouTube channel. I'm Patty Calhoun. Thanks for joining us and have a great